Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Five Strikes Tonight. My name is Sydney Hunt, editor and writer, or an editor and writer, should I say, at Dirty South Soccer. SB Nation's home for all things Atlanta United, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. So glad you can join me tonight, Friday, August 27th, 2021, and a massive match coming up for Atlanta United for a couple of reasons. Of course, it's the first match that Gonzalo Pineda will be on the touchline for the first time as Atlanta United head coach, taking over for Rob Valentino, who led Atlanta United so well during his interim spell after the firing of Gary Heinze. But it is big for another reason, because Atlanta United are, of course, on a 4-match winning streak, and they have a chance, an opportunity at least, to jump into the playoff discussion, jump above that red line, if you will, to get back into the playoff running. They'll have a tough time tomorrow night, or tomorrow afternoon, I should say, at Mercedes-Benz Stadium as they take on a very good Nashville SC team. Nashville, of course, being led by players like Sapong and Muktar, who have really driven the bus for Nashville SC this season and have put, again, Nashville in a really good spot and a really good chance to break into really the top half of the standings. So we're going to talk about that this evening. That's a 3:30 kickoff tomorrow, Saturday, on Univision and TUDN. I'm pronouncing that right, I think, TUDN. And of course, the English language stream will be live on Twitter. Joining me now tonight to talk about the match is Ben Wright. Ben is from Broadway Sports. He covers all things Nashville SC. Ben, that's your name. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, Sydney. Thanks for having me on. This should be a fun time.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. We'll talk about Nashville SC. We'll talk about their season thus far in just a little bit. But you're talking before the show, pretty big day for the city of Nashville. Yeah. Not just the soccer community, but the sporting community in Nashville as a whole, as United States men's national team will host Canada at Nissan Stadium as part of the final round of World Cup qualifying. And really, it's a lot of excitement due to not only the makeup of the United States roster, but the Canadian roster as well, with players such as Alphonso Davies expected to play in that match. You actually broke the news of the match being played at Nissan Stadium a few months back. So tell me, can you talk about the buzz that's being around Nashville, in anticipation for what should be a really good match against the Canadians?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all kind of what we've seen for, I would say, the past 4 or 5 years. I think really, if you go back to 2017 when the Preds made the Stanley Cup run,
yeah,
and it just got a lot of national attention. I mean, like, they had basically Broadway was completely packed out. You had fans just all over downtown Nashville. Right. And so I think that got a lot of national media attention, and kind of, I think it maybe broke a little bit of the stereotype of Nashville as not really being a sports city. And then you have like the NFL draft come to Nashville, which was just a massive party. I think that added to it. And on top of that, you just had a lot of international soccer events at Nissan Stadium. There was a Gold Cup match in 2017. The Mexican national team came and played this summer. Back before Nashville got an MLS team, Manchester City and Tottenham came. So, I mean, I think Nissan Stadium has been kind of a destination for some international matches. But now with getting this World Cup qualifier and the potential of hosting a World Cup match in 2026, I think fans here are really excited.
Yeah, we just talked about it. The rosters are pretty stacked for both teams, especially Canada. This isn't really your father's Canada team, is it? I mean, it really is a golden generation for the Canadians. I mentioned Davis. I didn't mention Jonathan David and a lot of the other young players that are on that roster. But, of course, the United States has some young players of their own, as you know. How are you feeling as far as this particular cycle is concerned about the state of the United States national team?
I mean, I don't feel like it's a hyperbole to be like more excited about this U.S. team than I can remember. I mean, I told some of the guys at Broadway while we were waiting for the roster to get released. I don't think I've been this excited about a roster drop since maybe the 2014 World Cup. So I think I don't think it's just me either. I think just around the program, there's just a lot more optimism, especially with the young talent that we're seeing playing at really the highest levels around Europe. I think it's important to remember how young this team is. I think the average age is just over 24.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, and I think obviously they should do much better than they did last cycle. And I think that they'll probably have a good shot to go fairly deep in the World Cup. But I think really 2026 has to be the focus. I mean, these guys will be in their prime. It'll be on home soil. And I think everything has to be viewed through the lens of building towards that.
Yeah, with the eyes of Nashville will be on Walker Zimmerman, of course, being named to Greg Berhalter's roster. And we, of course, saw Zimmerman during the Gold Cup alongside Miles Robinson in that center back spot for the U.S. men's national team. And like I said, we'll kind of get to Nashville as a whole in a little bit. But can you tell me about Walker's impact on Nashville and how he's grown to really one of the top center backs in the league?
Yeah, I mean, I think last year tells you everything you need to know. I mean, he was the heart of the best defense in expansion history, winning MLS Defender of the Year in his first year. So, I mean, I think that basically gives you the bullet points. But, I mean, on the field, right. I think this year you've seen him improve. He was always an attacking threat from set pieces. But I think he's really emphasized going into this year, he's just much better with the ball at his feet. He's playing more aggressively out of the back. I think you've seen that translate to the national team. He'll make runs forward occasionally, especially when they play in a back three. I think James Sands kind of helped give him a little bit more freedom that way. So I think the race between him and Miles Robinson for really what feels like that starting spot next to Brooks, that's going to be really interesting. I think probably Robinson has the edge, deservedly, based on his Gold Cup performance. But I mean, it's going to be a long qualifying cycle, especially with these three windows. So I mean, depth is going to be important. I think they're going to be a pretty good chunk of minutes to go around.
Again, that's next Sunday at Nissan Stadium. U.S. men's national team against Canada. That's in between their matches at El Salvador and at Honduras to start World Cup qualifying. All right, let's shift gears. Let's talk about Nashville SC itself. 32 points, tied with Philadelphia. But Philadelphia has the tiebreak, so Nashville are in fourth in the Eastern Conference standings. And needless to say, it's been a really good year for them. And I'll start with how they've been playing at home. Nissan Stadium has really become a fortress for Nashville. They haven't lost there, I mean, for crying out loud. So on the other side of that coin, though, away form hasn't been as good. So why hasn't Nashville SC been able to win away from home?
Yeah, I mean, I think for starters, it's just hard to win on the road in MLS. I forget what the actual numbers are. I think it's like 23% of the time the away team wins. But yeah, I think that's the big mystery. There hasn't been a huge difference in the way that Nashville's played on the road. They've created plenty of chances. I mean, Miami and Toronto were two of the big ones. They created enough chances to win both of those games, and they came away with 1 point between those. So I think it's kind of eluded Gary Smith. We did a kind of deep dive into it this week where we went back and watched a lot of the games and looked at the numbers. Right. And I thought we'd get more clarity from that than we did. And it still is a little bit just perplexing why they haven't got more from the road. But I mean, that really does have to change. I mean, they're averaging 0.71 points on the road, I believe, and they have 10 games left to go. So you got to get more than 7 points from those next 10 games. I think they should. They'll have a second crack at Toronto, another crack at Miami. But yeah, it's really been perplexing, especially when you consider just how good they've been at Nissan Stadium, like you alluded to.
Yeah, and Atlanta United had that same issue, right? Winning away from home before, they're able to beat Columbus Crew, and then DC United after that on the road at Audi Field. Do you feel that, maybe one win, one result away from home will kind of open the floodgates and really help them to gain that confidence they need toward this, really this latter half of the season?
Yeah, I think it should. I think it's why the Miami game was so frustrating. They had a chance to go up in the 88th minute. From Jonder Cadiz that was missed, and then you give up a goal in the 95th to lose it. And it felt like getting a winner there kind of would have kick-started the second half of the season. I mean, on the plus side, they haven't won on the road, but they're only conceding a goal a game. They've kept 3 clean sheets, including against New England. So I mean, I think there are some positives, but you have to get a result here soon to really start building something on it. I think they have their roster is built well in theory to winning on the road. So hopefully a one win will kind of kickstart it.
And you alluded to it, Nashville's defense, and we're really good last year. Good again this year, 20 goals allowed, which is one of the lowest totals in MLS. And that seems like that's been Gary Smith's bread and butter. Mm-hmm. We talked about Zimmerman earlier and his impact on this defense. Who are some other guys that maybe kind of lost in that have risen to the forefront this season for Nashville?
Yeah, I mean, I think Dave Romney for the past 2 years has kind of been like almost criminally underrated around the league. He's played every minute for Nashville in MLS. He and Joe Willis both. But Romney especially, he's just always calm in possession. He's a really underrated passer. But defensively, he doesn't make mistakes. I believe Tony Husband, who does the play-by-play for TV, he pulled out a great stat the other day that in over 70 hours of soccer, he's made one mistake that's led directly to a goal.
Wow.
So he's just been a rock at the back. And then I think Jack Mayer, too. He was drafted second overall in the Super Draft last year. And kind of was the front office took a little bit of flack from the fans for passing on Daryl DK to get him. But he's really stepped up this year. He's kind of been the beneficiary of switching to a back three, initially at least. And I think now at this point, he's kind of forcing Gary Smith's hand to stay in a back three just because he's been so good that it's really hard to drop him. So I think those two especially have really stepped up.
Yeah, granted, I mean, we all know what DK did, so obviously hindsight's 2020.
Right,
but, that's probably another topic for another day. One player we won't see during this particular match is Dexter McCarty, who is suspended due to yellow card accumulation, of course. McCarty, who has been around forever, obviously celebrating his 400th appearance.
Yeah.
One of, I believe, only 6 players to hit that number. Explain the impact that Dax has had on this roster, not just from a veteran standpoint, but as its captain.
Yeah, I mean, he's really kind of been the face of the team through their first 2 years. I mean, he's always the first one to talk to the media. Especially, he's one of the guys who will consistently like talk after a tough loss, which I respect a lot. On the field, he's almost been kind of like a second coach. He's really telling players where to go. Kind of carrying out Gary Smith's game plan on the field. I think he and Anibal Godoy have really kind of been the core of the team. I mean, I know there's an argument to be made for Romney and Zimmerman, but I think Godoy and McCarty's partnership has been just as important, if not more so. They've done really, really well at kind of setting Nashville's game plan of winning the ball and getting it to goal quickly. I think they've been key, and especially McCarty, just how much ground he covers on both sides of the ball. He does a lot of the dirty work defensively, and then he's just a really underrated passer. He springs a lot of their attacks, and I think he's been invaluable to the team.
Yeah, one of the things that really caught my eye earlier this season, I don't know how many games it was. It might have been the draw or something that you all had against, I forget who, but McCarty went on Twitter and said, look, I mean, it's not good enough. You guys as fans expect better, and we promise to give you better. And the next match, you got to figure who they're playing, but they won that one pretty handily, I believe. So
I think that was they drew 0-0 with Miami and then turned around and beat New England.
I'm
pretty sure that was it.
Okay. But that really speaks to, again, his leadership qualities, doesn't it? I mean, again, like I said, he's been around forever. He really is that guiding force for the younger players on the team. Yeah,
I mean, I think he's a really good example of, I think, just how Nashville have built their roster. I think they've went especially in the first season, they went really hard on veterans, with a couple of young talented players like Muktar and Leal brought in from overseas. And I think it maybe hasn't changed how expansion rosters are going to be built going forward, but I think it's really established just how important MLS experience is when you're first starting out. And I think, Gary Smith and Mike Jacobs are examples of that in the front office side, and I think Gary Smith is the perfect. Dax McCarty, I think, is the perfect example of that on the field.
Yeah. And speaking of veterans, and again, McCarty looks like has been a really good signing for Nashville SC. Speaking of veterans, another veteran that we have to mention is CJ Sapong. We kind of touched on earlier, but he leads the team with I believe 8 goals at last check. A player that hasn't been around quite as long as McCarty, of course, but still has a lot of tread on his tires, a lot of stops in MLS. So another player that has provided that veteran leadership for some of the young players. What's a guy like Sapong meant to this team?
I mean, he's been everything. I think if you had to pick right now, I think you'd be hard pressed to choose between Hani Muktar and CJ Sapong for the team MVP right now.
Right.
But he's been fantastic. I think obviously he's got 8 goals. He's contributed, I think 3 or 4 assists. I can't remember off the top of my head, but a good chunk.
Yeah.
I think what's most important, though, you saw this in flashes last year from McCartys, and it just wasn't consistent enough. But having Sapong there to really take pressure off of Muktar and Leal has just opened up Nashville's attack. His movement off the ball is just so good. He opens up space, he pulls defenders out of position, and he gives Muktar and Leal a lot of space to operate underneath. And then he's great on the ball. He links up really well in build up. And then he's a solid finisher. So I mean, he's keeping Ake Loba, who they bought for $7 million, on the bench, as well as John McCartys. So 2 DPs are on the bench because of him. And I think he's basically undroppable at this point. There's an argument to be made that this is the best form of his career. And it's a little bit insane to me that Nashville picked him up so late in the offseason when there are teams around the league who I think probably needed a striker even more than they did.
Yeah. What's been different about him here in Nashville in this first season than, say, last year with Chicago when he only scored twice in 11 matches? I mean, of course, he had the season in 2019 where he scored 13 times and then 16 goals with Philly in 2017. But last year wasn't as good for him. What's kind of been the difference this year? How has Gary Smith been able to get the best out of him?
Yeah, I mean, well, he hasn't talked about it a ton, but he has mentioned a couple of times that there are just some off the field issues. I mean, he had some injuries, and then I believe he and his girlfriend had one of their children was born early, which just there were complications that he had to deal with off the field. Yeah. But I think Nashville's just a better situation. He's healthy. He's back with a coaching staff that I think their style of play and their tactics really fits what he's good at. And I think Gary Smith has just put him in positions that get the most out of him. And I think also, too, it's been the front three of Sapong, Leal, and Muktar have just clicked for whatever reason. Yeah. I think switching to the back three especially has just given them a ton more freedom. It's let Alistair Johnston and Dan Levitt, whoever else is playing in the wingback, really push forward and provide that width so that Muktar and Leal can stay more central. And so those three just get in some really tight positions and are able to just interchange quick passes. So I think it's just a system that really brings out the best in all three of them.
It's Sapong with 4 goals in his last 3 matches. I was watching the DC United match where he had that brace, kind of looking to see if he'd get that hat trick, but it wasn't to be. But really is in a good run of form at this particular point in time, and a player that Atlanta United will certainly have to watch out for on Saturday. Hani Muktar, let's talk about him. Of course, the other DP, you mentioned the other two, but Muktar, of course, has had a strong season himself, 7 goals. What's been, I guess, the difference between this year for him versus last year?
I think, too, it's just getting more comfortable. He talked about last year. I mean, he's not, to his credit, kind of similar to McCarty. He's just been really open and upfront about the media, upfront with the media, and he's willing to admit when he's had a rough time. But he has said that just last year was difficult coming to the U.S., and he was completely on his own for the full year. I mean, right. Family, friends weren't able to visit and stuff because of COVID and all that. And I think it was just we've seen it before. A lot of players coming from Europe take a little bit of time to adjust. And I think down the stretch last year, really from starting with that 3-1 win in Houston where he scored twice, you really saw him start to just get comfortable and kind of take off. And he's just kept up that form throughout this season. I mean, he has 8 goals, 7 assists. Davey Shepard, one of our hosts over at our podcast, said before the season that his prediction was Muktar would controversially be left out of the best 11 at the end of the year. And I think right now he's probably on pace for that.
No, I would agree. As you said, 8 goals, 7 assists. It doesn't always find the net. Some of those goals it looks like earlier in the season, but 7 assists certainly speak for
Yeah.
themselves. And you talk about Muktar. You talk about Sapong. Collectively, this team has had 32 goals. I mean, obviously New England is at the top of 44, but Nashville, they look like they have goals in them, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Well, let's put it this way. Earlier in the year, I thought it was a little bit skewed just because of game state. They were coming from behind, especially early. I mean, going down 2-0 to Cincinnati and Montreal back to back.
Right.
So it looked like it might have been a little bit misleading, but I mean, it's carried out throughout the season. They've just created a lot more. They look especially dangerous on the counterattack, which, like I said, I think that just goes back to Leal, Sapong, and Muktar especially. It just feels like outside of those three, it feels like the whole team is really clicking. And they just look a lot more comfortable in their second year under Gary Smith. It really seems like he has the team playing how he's wanted them to play. You saw the same thing at the USL level. The first season under Gary Smith, they were good, but struggled a little bit in the final third. And in year two, they just really took off. And I think we're kind of seeing a mirror of that at the MLS level.
What's their ceiling? I mean, Gary Smith knows how to coach. I mean, he's won at this level already, but what's the ceiling for Nashville right now? As we mentioned, they're in fourth. They have a chance to, if they play their cards right, get themselves a home game at Nissan Stadium, where we already mentioned, they haven't lost at home this year. New England, of course, is running away with the East, but Nashville has really a chance to finish, third, second, and like I said, position themselves for that home game in the playoffs. What's the ceiling for this team?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think no one's catching New England, first of all. So I think that ship has already sailed. As far as I think their ceiling is really anywhere behind New England. I think they should be shooting for a home playoff game. That's going to mean they're going to need to take a lot more points on the road than they have to date.
Yep.
And like we talked about earlier, I think one result could really change that for them. If they can kind of figure out how to get points on the road, which might mean sitting back a little bit and defending more, I think the top four spot feels like a very fair goal for them. And then once they get in the playoffs, I mean, it just feels, going back to last year too, this team is built in such a way that, like, you don't want to play them in a knockout game because they're able to defend, they're able to hit you on set pieces, they're able to hit you on the counter. So it feels like once they get in the playoffs, it's really wide open.
What does this kind of, where they are right now, did that kind of line up with your expectations before the season?
No, I forget where I picked them in fifth or sixth, I think.
Right.
And that felt a little bit optimistic. So I've honestly been blown away so far. We'll see. I mean, if the struggles on the road continue, on the flip side, they could end up closer to 6th, 7th. So there's still a lot of soccer left to be played, but so far they've been much better than I think anyone has expected.
One of the things that we were talking about, and it kind of relates to the season for Nashville and Atlanta United have had some issues with it as well, are set pieces. And I feel like what I was looking at, I think it was a tweet from Broadway Sports, I think it was, like your site, that was talking about it. I mean, what does Nashville need to do to correct that part of its game?
If I knew, I would be coaching the team. Gary Smith. I asked Gary Smith that, and he said the two things that you need to defend set pieces are getting a body on the attacker and just wanting it more. And he said Nashville haven't done either of those things this year. They've conceded 8 goals from set pieces this year, which is, I think it's right at 40% of their goals. They conceded 2 all last year. So I mean, it's a huge difference. I would have said last year that set pieces in general, both attacking and defending, were one of their biggest strengths, and it's turned out to be a huge weakness. So I think it's almost as surprising as how good their attack has been how bad they've been at defending set pieces. Some of that has been Walker Zimmerman. I think I ran the numbers yesterday, and I think he's been missing for 6 of those goals that they've conceded. So he's obviously huge, and I think having him back will improve that. But I mean, it's just not something you'd expect from a a team with defenders like Jaleel Anababa, Dave Romney,
Sure.
Jack Mayer. I mean, CJ Sapong, as good as he's been in the attacking third, he lost his man on their goal. I believe it was against Chicago. So it's a little bit surprising to see them concede like this, and I think it's something that Gary Smith said he has really emphasized a lot this past week. So they've been a good set piece defending team last year, and I think hopefully it doesn't feel like it should be an issue that's difficult to correct. So I mean, I think if they can figure that out, that'll raise their ceiling significantly. But at this point, it feels like set piece defending isn't just kind of a coincidence. It feels like it's more of a long-term trend with them.
So we've mentioned, some of the higher profile players for Nashville SC. Is there anyone that maybe I left off that has been underrated? I mean, you mentioned Romney, but is there anybody that we should be in particular keeping an eye on that maybe might not show up on the stat sheet or might not come up in everyday conversation about Nashville?
Yeah, well, I think tomorrow, Brian Anunga, I would say, is a big one to watch. Dex McCarty, he and Matt LaGrosse are both in the league health and safety protocols, and McCarty's suspended anyway.
Sure.
So it basically means Godoy and Anunga are going to be the starters in midfield, and Anunga's been exceptional. I mean, he's been a borderline starter. He's improved, especially his passing has improved a ton from last year, and he's just kind of a wall defensively. He reminds me a lot of Ozzie Alonso. I think that's kind of he's 24. I think that's kind of his ceiling, and I think kind of as McCarty and Godoy, they're both on the wrong side of 30. I think as they start to get towards the end of their careers, I think we'll see more and more from Brian Anunga. And then another one I would definitely watch is Alistair Johnston. He's turned into the starting right back, unquestioned for Nashville. He's a starter for the Canadian national team. I mean, he played every minute for them at the Gold Cup, including that semifinal against Mexico. So that's going back to the Nashville World Cup qualifier. I think that's another reason to watch it, because it'll Johnston should be starting for Canada, and then I think McCarty probably has Zimmerman has a 50-50 shot to start for the U.S. So it could be two teammates going against each other. But he's been exceptional. He's just improved consistently over the past 18 months from making his professional debut to being a starter at the Canadian national team. Yeah. And I think he's probably, if I had to bet on which Nashville SC player would be sold to Europe first, I would put pretty good money on him.
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic, isn't it? You're training alongside each other, you're playing alongside each other one day, and then the next day or the next week you're going up against each other in World Cup qualifying or international match. And I think it was Brad Guzan asked about it, a few years back, and he didn't really know how to describe the dynamic, but looks like Nashville will certainly be in that situation come next Sunday. By the way, you mentioned Anunga, who should be familiar to Atlanta United fans as a former Charleston Battery. Of course, the Battery have had quite a history with Atlanta United through primarily U.S. Open Cup. So a name that Atlanta United fans might recognize. Final question, and this is about Gary Smith as a whole. What's been his message to the team? I think you've kind of mentioned some things here and there about set piece defending and his overall philosophy that he's been trying to bestow on the team. Can you talk about what that is and how he's been able to rally his team to be as good as they've been this year?
I mean, I don't think it's a huge surprise if you look at his track record, especially in USL. I think he's kind of consistently, maybe not overperformed isn't the right word, but I think he's probably, going back to Colorado, I would say he has his teams playing more than just the sum of their parts. I think he's had rosters that maybe definitely weren't at the top end of MLS spending, and kind of got more out of them than most people expected. I think Nashville, he has a much better roster build than he did in Colorado, but I think you're seeing kind of the same traits from him. His players know exactly what their roles are. He has a clearly defined system. He builds from the back, which I think is a really huge piece for expansion teams. If you can be defensively solid, your ceiling's just significantly higher, regardless of if you're good or not going forward. And then I think it's just been incremental improvement, and I think we've seen that this year, just especially going forward. It's just gradually improved from last year. So I think he's really been the perfect manager to come in from the start and lead Nashville. I think if I had to guess what his message was this week, it would just be clean up some of the individual defensive mistakes, because overall they've been really good defensively. I mean, if you buy into XG, their expected goals against are some of the lowest in the league. And I think overall, I mean, it'll pass the eye test too. They really limit their opponents to low quality chances, and it's just been a couple sloppy mistakes, individual moments, poor set piece defending, and stuff that really shouldn't be repeatable and should be correctable. It's just been kind of it stuck around longer than you would have expected. So I think if they can clean up those issues, and I expect Gary Smith will, I think their ceiling gets a lot higher. So I would guess that's what he's been trying to hammer home this week.
Yeah. I was just thinking back to when Atlanta United were playing Nashville, back when they were Nashville USL at First Tennessee Park. I think it's called First Horizon Park. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it might be First Horizon Park now.
Yeah,
it changes every few months.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I remember back. It's this rainy day, like still a vibrant crowd, but then just
every game
raining.
Back in the USL days was raining.
But I was just thinking it was hard to believe it was. What was it, 3-4 years ago, something like that, when that was played?
February 2018. So
okay, about
3.5 years ago. Yeah,
about 3.5 years ago. Yeah, it was an adventure, especially on that hill, hill. And then I remember, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the field was just in the rain was just gathering on the field.
Yeah,
the ball couldn't roll properly, and
I think Joseph Martinez, I'm trying to remember his goal. I think it was like a back pass from Nashville that just got caught in a puddle, and he was right there to score it. Yeah, it was
I think remember that.
That was a fun game.
Yes, it was.
Hard to believe it was 3.5 years ago.
Yeah, and now fast forward, really big Southeastern derby at Mercedes-Benz Stadium on national television, Univision, to DNA, and in English on Twitter. Ben, how can people find you on social media or online?
Yeah, so all of my written coverage of Nashville is just at BroadwaySportsMedia.com, and I post all of that on Twitter, which it's easy to find me. It's just my name, Ben Wright.
Awesome. Well, Ben Wright, thank you very much, and looking forward to a great match not just next Sunday, but on Saturday, tomorrow, and hopefully talk to you soon.
Yeah, Sydney, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ben. Ben Wright from Broadway Sports Media here on Five Stripes tonight, this evening. So, yes, the big match tomorrow against Nashville SC at 3:30 at the Benz. And then, of course, World Cup qualifying coming up next week. Of course, Miles Robinson and George Bello were on the roster for Greg Berhalter as United States kicks off the octagonal next week, first against El Salvador, as I mentioned, and then next Sunday against Canada at Nissan Stadium in Nashville, which I know a lot of folks watching tonight will be at. They'll wrap up the September window against Honduras. El Salvador, by the way, coached by former U.S. international Hugo Perez. Speaking of that, excited to announce that on Tuesday night we'll be taping or recording a U.S. men's national team roundtable. So I'll be looking to premiere that on Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon, but we'll be recording that on Tuesday night. I'll have Bart Keeler on. Bart is, of course, a guest that has been on the show before. I think this will be Bart's third time on the show, so we're looking forward to having him talk about the U.S. men's national team, and then Donald Wine will be back to talk about the U.S. men's national team as well. Looking forward to it. Again, we'll be recording that on Tuesday night for a release on Wednesday afternoon. More to come on that closer to the date, but we'll be looking to answer your questions about the U.S. men's national team, the roster, and the September schedule. Quick note as well that Five Stripes Tonight is also on Twitter. Follow Five Stripes Tonight at FST_ATL. Already up to 60 followers after just launching the account this past week. So thank you guys for those that follow. Again, twitter.com/FST_ATL. My Twitter account is SHWright, SHWRITS. And of course, for the latest Atlanta United news, analysis, and opinion, log on to DirtySouthSoccer.com, SB Nation's home for all things Atlanta United. Again, my name is Sidney Hunt. So glad you could join me tonight. We will see you on Wednesday. We'll not have a show next Friday. We'll be back on Wednesday with that U.S. Men's National Team Roundtable. Thank you for your questions, and we'll try to answer, and be sure to tweet those out to us. Of course, more details to come about that show on Wednesday. Again, filming that or recording that on Tuesday night with Bart Keeler and Donald Wine from the American Outlaws. Again, my name is Sidney Hunt. Glad you can join me tonight. We'll see you next time for another edition of Five Stripes and Light. So long, everyone.